Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. We have a very exciting end of the day program. We've been talking around service coordination. Now we're going to get into the meat of things. What's that? I'm about to introduce Matthew Weidner, who leads strategic planning and systems analysis for King County Metro's demand responsive transportation. Matthew leads the agency's DRT research and spearheads translational technology initiatives to turn theoretical research, our stuff, into operational reality for DRT. He also advises the agency's DRT strategic technology direction and guides its investment in innovative and emerging mobility programs. With nearly 20 years in the industry, Matthew has been honored to speak at numerous conferences, both nationally and internationally, and serves on numerous transportation technology committees across the U.S. I will say, now ad-libbing, Matthew has been one of the most ardent and earliest supporters of our program. Really, absolutely pushing these ideas around sidewalk data collections at scale in a consistent manner for literally 9 years. You have all been great advocates for us, but Matthew really was the OG. And I fully appreciate your continued support for this. And I think now, 9 years later, that OSM is not a pariah, and that sidewalks are becoming more and more primal elements of our non-motorized transportation system. I think we agree that people are seeing the light, but it was very hard to get any kind of traction from agencies prior to this movement. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll welcome Matthew.
Thank you. As always, not as far too generous when talking about me. But thank you for this opportunity to talk to you all today. I really appreciate being in the same space and place, even online. I'm seeing a number of familiar names who I have run into and worked with in the past, and so very happy to be here and share time with a bunch of fellow transit nerds who are interested in esoteric things like sidewalk data and data standards and other stuff, because sometimes it's hard to find a space like that where we can all hang out together. Before I begin, for those people online this is going to be a kind of a couching a subject in a very local problem here for the Puget Sound area. You have to know, I think, two things. One is that the Puget Sound region has both county-based transit systems, as well as a regional transit authority that was created in 1996, somewhere around 1996. And which never existed before. But prior to that date, there was essentially kind of a cooperative ad hoc system of intercounty travel that didn't really work very well. Hence the creation of the Regional Transit Authority, Sound Transit. And every system expansion, every funding to give this agency more authority and more power to build cool stuff has been called ST something. So the first initiative was called ST1. The second initiative was called ST2. And today we'll be addressing the factors, the hidden imperative of ST3. So if you are at your computer and you have Wikipedia open, go look for ST3, and it'll have a quick explanation about what that did and how that affects the Puget Sound region and what Sound Transit is able to accomplish today. I'm Matthew Weidner. This is me. My face is big and bold there, but it basically says what Anat said. For those of you who online who aren't aware, King County Metro is, I think, still the 10th largest transit agency in the United States, but that was pre-COVID numbers up here, so you can take that with a grain of salt. We run the United States' 4th largest transit fleet, 2nd largest electric trolley fleet, and we are pretty big. We operate van pool, ferries, buses. We operate a Link Light Rail on behalf of Sound Transit. We operate streetcar, and if there's a donkey cart, we probably operate that too. So talking about Metro's long game, where does King County Metro see itself in the transportation perspective? All of our services are based upon the principles of safety, equity, and sustainability. And through these principles, we hope to drive long-term value, prove our value to the public, which allows us to invest in more mobility, measure that progress, which again allows us to demonstrate our value to the public. But enough of that. Let's talk about my new car. Earlier, let's see, about a year and a half ago, I bought a wonderful, Chevy Bolt EUV. It was great. It was like the first car that my wife and I bought, and we were like, we're going to get all the bells and whistles. We're going to get the sunroof. We're going to get the nice heated seats. We're going to get everything, including that really cool kind of like self-driving system, which Tesla kind of has. Well, Chevy has their own version, and we were like, oh, let's buy this. So we were at the dealership. We had a price tag. We're like, oh yeah, we can make that work. It'll be great. We'll splurge. We'll save ourselves. So we're driving around, have a great time, like, oh, this is a cool electric car. And then, I start reading through the pamphlets, and I start learning about my new car. And then I learned there's a whole nother cost to owning this car. And I'm sure you all have had this type of scenario where you buy something, you feel you're educated, you feel you're moving forward, and you're super excited, and then you realize, I got to shell out another $6,000 over the next 5 years just to make this thing work the way it was sold to me. Who's had this experience? Anybody? Anybody? Show of hands. Yeah, pretty common. So, these kind of hidden expenses are well documented across our economy. When someone's trying to sell us something, they might not always disclose all the costs, or we, as the buyer, may not understand, the operating costs that come along with it and what happens to that. And in this talk, it just so happens that this also happens with ballot measures, which I'm sure doesn't surprise anyone here. So in this case, Sound Transit's major ballot initiative, you can see here, this is one of the graphics that was used to sell or advertise what this ballot initiative brought to the public and what value it would demonstrate to us. Can anyone see what's missing in here? I know one person knows, but she works at Sound Transit, so I'm not going to. I'll tell you. What was missing in this was the fact that this ballot measure actually creates a regional paratransit system in the Puget Sound region, but it wasn't included. It was one of those hidden costs that either we didn't think about, or wasn't planned for, or was just something after the fact. After you buy the car, you read the manual, and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to pay an extra $6,000 for this. So fair thoughts at this moment are, what is he talking about? My phone is dying. I got to leave the room soon. Why did I start this talk about my car? And I need to buy waffles at the grocery store, which I do, so please remind me to do that. So fair enough if those are your thoughts at this moment, but also you could ask the question of why did ST3 create this regional paratransit system? Even if it does, how the heck is this thing going to work? And why wasn't it included in the ST3 package when we went out? So to avoid myself getting in trouble, I'm not going to cover number 3. I think number 3 is a really good project for a master's thesis who is working on a PhD or master's interested in organizational dynamics and how ballot initiatives are constructed and how organizations function. So if you are in the market for a thesis topic, I'm sure this is one available. It's free. I won't charge you for it. But what instead we're going to do right now is we're going to start in on a crash course of what ADA paratransit travel time comparability means. I'm just going to label this PTTC for future reference throughout the slides. This will get a little deep into the weeds, but hopefully we'll come back up and you'll kind of have an understanding of what I'm talking about. So let's start with the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. One of the last pieces of civil rights legislation in the United States, which granted equal opportunity for people with disabilities. Amazingly influential, a model for the world. When you travel to other countries, you can see with your own eyes what America is doing to enable the lives of people with disabilities that other countries are not. And it is, whenever I come home to the United States, it is one of the parts that makes me proud to be an American. What this act did is it created a new, amended and added a new section to the US Code. See right here, which defined paratransit as a complement to fixed route service. Secondly, it authorized the Secretary of Transportation to issue the final regulations to actually make this happen. After a year or two, the Federal Transit Administration created those regulations, which is under CFR 49, Subtitle A, Part 37, which is Transportation Services for Individuals with Disability. So, Part 37 has three components which are important to what we're talking about here today. It says, number one, that each public entity operating a fixed route transit system shall provide paratransit to individuals with disabilities that is comparable to the fixed route system. Point number one. Point number two, and I highlighted the rail here portion, that rail systems, the service shall consist of a circle with a radius of 3/4 of a mile around each station. And number three, capacity constraints. Entities shall not limit the service by any of the following. And the important point here is paragraph C, which is excessive trip lengths. So, in summary, this was very detailed, but generally we can say three things. Public agencies must provide paratransit. In any place that you have been in the continental United States or Hawaii or Alaska, if you have ridden a bus or a train, there is a parallel paratransit system for those individuals whose disability prevents them from using that bus or rail system. Even though you don't see it, it is there, and it is part of the fabric of the United States transportation infrastructure. Secondly, that paratransit area is provided 3/4 of a mile around that service. So in terms of a bus, it is 3/4 of a mile along the entire length of the corridor. For rail, it is within 3/4 of a mile of the station area. But many, many systems decide to provide paratransit along 3/4 of a mile along the corridor, no matter what type of service it is. And the last important part is that paratransit travel time must not exceed the travel time on that service. That is a very important aspect in terms of the quality of the service. If someone without a disability were to get on light rail and travel from here to SeaTac Airport, it is impermissible that someone whose disability prevents them from using the service be transported in any less time. So they can't be on their paratransit vehicle for 2 hours. They have to get there in the same 35 minutes that someone without a disability would travel that same corridor. That is the essence of equality, and it is the essence of what the ADA provides to all citizens, no matter their ability. As always, there are a couple of asterisks here. This is a gross oversimplification from many aspects. There are carve-outs in the ADA. If you're interested in reading the entire law, you can read about New York City, which has a very particular ADA regime. And this also does not apply to commuter services. So if you are riding on a sounder train, that is considered a commuter service for which paratransit under the law was carved out, and there is no requirement for that. Everybody with me so far? All right, good. Whew, that was the hard part. Now comes the fun part, maps. Everybody loves maps. So what does the ADA paratransit situation look like for the Puget Sound region at this time? We have 5 major transit agencies in the Puget Sound region. Everett Transit up north, operated by the city of Everett. Community Transit, which is a corporation designed to serve the Snohomish County area. King County Metro, which is part of the county government, who I work for, who operates transit here within the area of King County. Sound Transit, which is the agency which I mentioned before, which was founded by voters to provide inter-county travel across the Puget Sound region. And then Pierce Transit to the south. This represents the 5 major transit agencies in the area. This is, I realize now that my community transit service area is inaccurate. So these are 4 independent services and service areas. King County Metro currently provides Sound Transit's paratransit service along Link Light Rail. We operate the trains. We signed an agreement with Sound Transit to also provide paratransit services on their behalf. So we have 4 independent areas. If you can see on the map, there are 4 big blobs covering the estimated area of where these paratransit services operate, and then a very skinny gray blob that is in the middle of King County Metro. That is my approximation of where the Link Light Rail system is for purposes of this talk. Intercounty travel in our region was first set up by an agreement with the PSRC, the Puget Sound Regional Council, which is the MPO, or Metropolitan Planning Organization, for the Puget Sound area. So that agreement was signed, I believe, back in 1995, and hasn't been updated since. And we have been operating the paratransit system under those guidelines ever since. Excuse me. One of the aspects of the original PSRC intercounty agreement was that there was very limited coordination between the entities that serve Puget Sound. We have 4 completely separate, unlinked computer systems that operate on their own. We have, over the years, established 4 inter-system, or I sometimes call them intercounty, inter-system transfer points, which I have marked with a little black arrow thing. There is one, as you can see, up north between Everett and Community Transit. If someone from Community Transit is here, they'll probably correct me. There is another 2 that provide transfers between Community Transit and King County Metro up in the north end of our service area. And then there's a single transfer location to the south of King County Metro's transfer service area where we transfer with Pierce Transit. As the PSRC agreement defines, you cannot drop and go when you have a customer. You have to wait with that customer until the meeting vehicle arrives and you have a warm handoff, as we sometimes call it, between the 2 systems. At present, there is no automated ETA exchange between the systems, as they are completely isolated. So King County Metro, in our computer system, cannot see the location or the estimated arrival time of a Pierce Transit system, of the Pierce Transit service. So on the ground, what do operations look like? Looks like this. Without interconnected systems, we end up calling a lot. As I said, this system is unchanged since the mid-90s, so we continue to use mid-90s technology and operating philosophies when making these systems work. So let's get into what the future holds. As you can see, there's an updated graphic up there. So some of the major changes that occur under ST3 provides light rail from Everett to Tacoma. So Everett is the northernmost city in this scenario. Tacoma is the southernmost along the Puget Sound. Seattle to Bellevue, which comes from the interior of Seattle out to the east. And then Bellevue, even further east into Issaquah. It also deploys bus rapid transit from Linwood to Burien via the I-5 corridor, and also Shoreline to Bothell, which is at the north end of Lake Washington, just between the border of Snohomish County and King County. So what do you notice about the small gray sliver that was in the previous slide? Anyone? Bueller. Bigger. It's bigger. What else? It crosses counties. Isn't that interesting? Therefore,
all 4 transit agencies.
all 4 transit agencies. Therefore, if we use the transitive property from what we learned in the earlier slides, we can conclude the following. That Sound Transit must provide paratransit from Everett to Tacoma, at least 3/4 of a mile around the service, and the travel time must not exceed that of Link Light Rail. So the question is our current system of interagency transfers up to this task? So let's take an example based upon some estimated figures. Laura is already giving a very strange face, which means she's concerned. Let's look at Sam's trip from the future potential Sam's trip from Alderwood Station area to Tacoma Dome to see Taylor Swift on her, 5th Eras tour, because by this time, she'll have done it again. On Sound Transit, Sam would walk approximately 20 minutes, probably from their home to the station area, would take Link, and arrive at Tacoma Dome. One-seat ride, easy peasy. The estimated travel time on Link would be approximately 96 minutes, so a comfortable hour and a half, listening to the Taylor Swift songs as they ride. And the average speed for the entire thing, including walk time, would be around 28 miles per hour would be their estimated travel time across the region. Now let's look if we apply the same theoretical trip to our current context of paratransit transfers and what that means. So going from the west, so this is a trip for someone with a disability who cannot use Link Light Rail because a disability prevents it. So under the current regime, CT would pick this person up from their home, transport them about 2 miles to Linwood Transit Center. They would then go to Linwood Transit Center to South Federal Way Park and Ride to be transferred again, a trip of about 42 miles. And then they'd be finally picked up by Pierce Transit in the end to go from South Federal Way Park and Ride to Tacoma Dome, at approximately 10 miles. So how does this compare when we look at the performance of this inter-county system? So we don't have to worry about what time it is or what day it is. We just want to look at the transfers because those are basically the way that the inter-county system operates is the transfer system. At present, our system offers a 33-minute wait between systems in Linwood, and it offers a 28-minute wait at South Federal Way Park and Ride when moving between paratransit systems. This means a total of, on average, 61 minutes is spent with this person waiting, not going anywhere, just waiting for the other leg or other system to arrive. We take this, we compare this to the 116 minutes that was the estimate from the person without a disability traveling between these 2 points. And that leaves us 55 minutes of travel time to get from Linwood to Tacoma Dome. So the average required speed from the time that that bus leaves the Linwood Transit Center until they screech into the Tacoma Dome parking lot, that bus would have to maintain a speed of 59 miles per hour the entire time. Now, you should note that the speed limit on I-5 is 60 miles per hour. And the speed limit on I-5 on a Wednesday afternoon is probably 20 miles per hour. So, can we deliver this? 4 a.m. to 1 a.m., 7 days a week, and since this is paratransit, this is public transit, this isn't a taxi, can we deliver it as a shared ride to maximize the use of our public resources to their full potential? And the answer is probably pretty clear, that this does not work. That there are some limitations that are limiting what we can do and how far we can go. The region's paratransit systems are isolated and uncoordinated. And the interagency transfers are, frankly, inefficient in their current form and not up to task for what is demanded in the future scenario. Looking at the time, okay, I'll try to hurry. So this brings about the hidden imperative of ST3, the one which we bought when we got ST3, but wasn't, we only realized after we bought it, was that ST3 requires the regionalization of our region's paratransit systems. We've done some thinking and have come up with some ways that we can think about how to solve this problem. How do we achieve regionalization? And there's generally 5 large options which have been scoped out, which, let's see, next slide. Oh, yeah. Which we can kind of summarize as such. There are 4 particular models which have been proven and would solve this problem. Option 1R, 2R, 4R, which is hidden behind that thing, and option 5R. These are all methods that we have seen deployed successfully in the context of the United States. Number 1, I'll just try to summarize this quickly, is a mega agency. So Sound Transit and King County kind of merging our programs, jointly managing a single program. 2R, which is, I call mega IT, which is Sound Transit is in charge of IT for all the area's paratransit systems, yet each paratransit operates independently. Number 4, which is completely uncoordinated, which is essentially a taxi service between the areas, offering direct rides, because that's really the only way we would be able to solve this. And 5R, which is the mega agency, which is creating a new government entity to basically take on this role for the entire region. But, because we know technology and because we know what's feasible, there is also a new option on the table which has never been tried before. This is option number 3, which is interoperation of paratransit systems across the area. So these next slides, if you were here last year, you'll probably see some of this before. This is how our current systems are constructed. And one of the things we can consider is that we can consider federated demand response commingling. So creating a data layer above all these independent systems, which would facilitate basically a situational awareness of the region's paratransit systems, as well as facilitate the movement of rides between various systems in order to allow seamless operation and the sharing of resources between what are independent operations. Looking at some of the responsibilities, each local system would accept requests, coordinate delivery trips within their own program resources, detect the service defects, and optimize service delivery within available resources. A data exchange orchestrator would provide the visibility to see, so that each underlying system could see the entire paratransit picture across the region, facilitate the sharing of service delivery resources, so AKA vehicles, and optimize the interagency service in order to meet ST3's requirements of comparable travel time along the entire corridor. So what does this look like in a theoretical operation? So we're taking a look at Sam's trip again, going from West Alderwood Station all the way down to Tacoma Dome. CT would pick Sam up at home. Oh, that's a typo. That should be replaced with Tacoma Dome. My apologies. Would take Sam all the way to Tacoma Dome, would have a travel time of 126 minutes, and would be traveling at approximately 28 miles per hour for that entire time. So what could we do with that entire 116-minute journey time instead of the, what did we have, 55 minutes previously? So essentially double the time. Well, with that time, King County and Pierce Transit could see Sam's scheduled trip on the CT service, know that CT van's scheduled and live itinerary, so before the day and of the day of delivery. CT and PT could, or KCM and PT could request to add trips in our system to that route as it's traversing our service area. They could see the live ETA and vehicle position of that vehicle as well as every other vehicle in the region. And also utilize empty deadhead capacity. When that CT van has to return to CT's territory, again, PT could use, PT and KCM could use that time, that deadhead time, for something else. So we could make useful resources out of what is something that is entering our territory. So with this, and in the end, we could settle funding. So we want to compensate CT for their time and the use of their resources. So yeah, let's pay them. So in the end, lower cost, fewer total resources required. But we can do that with all of these. But what makes number 3 having never been accomplished before? Why is it unproven? One, data standards. Data standards. Let me do my data standards dance. We have no common data standards to speak the same language between these systems. So that's why they have always been uncoordinated. They have always been isolated. We need data standards that describe the real-time data for these types of systems, the scheduled and live status, and we also need trip booking protocols between different systems. And thankfully, there are organizations, and there's progress on this. One Call, One Click is a step along this direction with the King County Mobility Coalition. Mobility data is also moving along this trajectory. So hooray, progress. Number two, what is also holding us back is software. If you're not the Department of Defense, as a government agency, you have an innate fear of greenfield software development. Like, governments are very adverse to taking a chance, even though we can show the benefits and even though we can mitigate the risks. Greenfield development is not something that governments do, generally. So we need a whole mindset shift that we can take these chances and we can tackle new challenges when they involve the digital sphere. And three, transit agencies. We are holding ourselves back. We need to think in APIs and not KPIs. We need to think in interoperable data frameworks, not necessarily intermodal transit. And we need to think about deploying networks of technologies instead of just bus routes. We also need the tools internally in order to manage and think about these systems. And push for the adoption of data standards at every level. And finally, we need the right tactics from our leadership who understand the value proposition that technology presents to both the end user as well as to the organization itself, and then the ability to identify and act upon that value proposition. So, in conclusion, this imperative of ST3 has highlighted one thing, that data standards are not just a theoretical exercise. There is a real need, and it is here now. And we have a situation in front of us to lead the way and present a new direction for the entire paratransit industry that optimizes our use of resources, that coordinates with one another, and pushes equity and cooperation first instead of top-down approaches that we've used in the past. And that's it. Thank you so much.
To mention that when I asked Matthew who he would most want to riff on this with, he mentioned Kevin Chambers, who just walked up on stage.
Hi, I'm Kevin Chambers. I have a base out of Portland, and I have a consulting company called Full Path Transit Technology that works actively to support small transit agencies across the country with regard to being more effective with technology. And one thing to know about any large transit agency is it has nested in it a small transit agency, which is where Matthew works in the case of King County Metro. So, yeah, that's me.
So then let's open the audience for any questions, or open the discussion to audience questions.
Well, I have a couple observations. I mean, one thing that I thought was interesting, kind of going into this, was some of the language that I heard at the outset of your talk. You welcomed people coming to talk about something that you called esoteric. I noted Anat, talked about support from you at a time when OSM was a pariah. You mentioned that some people might be more interested in waffles than in this conversation. I mean, I think there's a general tone that this is hard stuff, this is important stuff, but it's also neglected stuff, right? And but that suddenly we have this sort of moment, which is really through the omission of an important consequence to actually move from esoterica and to move from negligence and sort of being in out of sight to suddenly needing to be in sight. I mean, it seems like what I'm hearing a little bit here is a possible theory of change from what you're saying. You're sort of painting a picture and saying, and now we're here. And I kind of see, like, waggling your eyebrows a little bit and saying, with this sort of data interoperability opportunity to, like, really do something different, do something completely novel. And I'm curious if you just want to say more about what your theory of change is. You kind of had your bullet points on that last slide. But I want to dig in a little bit more of, like, your, like, ideal world, like, 5 years from now.
Well, when the ADA was passed, still working? Still working?
Yes.
All right, sweet. When the ADA was passed, the technology at the time was very rudimentary. I mean, we were moving from systems that were basically organizing point-to-point transportation for people with disabilities on spreadsheets. And that spreadsheet mentality has kind of followed these programs into the present day. And leadership has lost track of that these programs can do so much more, and they can be so much more as long as they're paid attention to, and as long as we really think about their possibilities in a serious way. And so I lost track of my thought there for a second.
But it sounds like a phase change sort of opportunity from spreadsheet mentality to really like another qualitatively different way of thinking about it.
And so, when we were in a spreadsheet world, the only way to solve this was to put everything under one bucket. Just dump all the spreadsheets, make one person in charge of all the spreadsheets, make one organization, and they'll solve the problem. So you see this with the Bay Area Transit Authority, where you have many transit authorities that are overlapping and doing things. They just didn't know what to do, so they just created a new entity and said, here, you take it. But I think what we've learned in terms of technology collaboration, in terms of creating standards, is that we can do so much. We can both achieve equity and inclusion, and hear people out and include them in a system instead of just taking it over. Which has been the default approach to these types of systems for so long. And so what I think we're presented with is an opportunity to set a new direction for the entire industry and for the entire demand responsive kind of scene in the United States, is to put collaboration first instead of this takeover mentality, the simplicity of spreadsheet thinking.
Yeah, and I just want to point one other thing, and this kind of came from, we talked about your presentation a few days ago, and it stuck in my mind that on one hand, on this sort of data level, this reconceptualization of what's possible, and in a sense very sort of like transformational, and hey, we can really do things different. But I also heard that like there's this level at which it's also very conservative in the sense of it allows existing institutions to stay in place. So all the different ADA services don't suddenly have to get merged, like you say. You don't have to. So it's an interesting contrast, though. There's a shift that's needed, but one of the opportunities that your vision presents is the ability to keep a lot of existing infrastructure as it is, and in a sense be less disruptive.
Yeah, because the context of when the ADA was passed, there was nothing out there. So a lot of these institutions were being created from scratch, and so it would, like an East Bay Transit Authority, it just seemed easier at that moment to create something brand new. But now we have lived with these systems. These systems have developed histories. These systems have developed connections and stakeholders. And so, that may not be possible in our local political context, given that we have entrenched interests for these systems and people who relate to them, people who like and dislike them. But we have all made various changes to our local systems and how they operate, and each has a different flavor. And so essentially wiping the slate clean may not be an option. So we have to find a third way.
Great.
In the presentation earlier, 2 presentations ago, it was all about folks in India and the customer being at the center of the solution. And I'm curious with your 2R, 3R, 5R versions, if there's a thing about what would the impacts to the user be beyond just if they have a favorite driver or they have a that kind of thing, and also the complete trip, the return trip experience. Is the return trip going to be handled by the home agency, those kinds of things? So that's one set of questions. And then Then I have another question about the database stuff, is that if we go with 3R and the agencies don't have to change any of their systems, could later on, if that, we could work backwards from that interoperability to build software that everyone could then transition to when they're ready?
To the last one, I think anything is possible. It's just we need to set a direction. We need to chart the path of what we want these systems to look like in a new regional context and pursue it. And if something doesn't work, it's just technology. Just move a different direction. It's not like you're building, the Great Wall of China. You can move it and you can do something different, which, makes this great. The first question was the local context.
The client experience?
Yeah, and I think 3R is the one that preserves the most local control and keeps the operations as close to the client as possible. It still allows decision makers within King County or Pierce Transit or Community Transit to do their own flavors, but then cooperate where it is important and provide that seamlessness that Sound Transit desires and is required.
Hi, so we have 2 questions from our online participant. Joe, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, a serious kind of theoretical question here. Wouldn't the argument be made that if you got to do all this coordinating and all, that you would kind of want to consider maybe just merging the paratransits into one contract, one provider, point to point? You might have a situation where the elevators at a link station go down and all of a sudden that person that would take link is now eligible for paratransit. So just some thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Glad to hear you're online today. There is an argument for, I think in my slide deck that was either 1R or 5R, outlining the top-down approach. That is a proven method that has been replicated in many paratransit operations across the country. We know it works, but it does deprive local control from these entities that are currently operating the service. So if, under a single Uber operation, King County Council, Pierce Transit, City of Everett would no longer have any control to deliver specialized services or services above and beyond to their constituents. And so I think that's a that's a concern that has to be worked through, and it has to be something that we decide as a region to pursue if we do go that direction, and we have to weigh those consequences.
And the next question was from Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Anat. Justin Deno from Sound Transit. Matthew, I think you've kind of been touching on it, but my question was, this doesn't seem to be a totally unique problem, and what have other large sort of regions or areas done? So you mentioned obviously the Bay Area, which it sounds like they did a merge program. I don't think you've really touched on what maybe regions or agencies have done the 2R, the regional IT with local ops. What are some examples of that?
Yeah, an example of that is PACE, or from my perspective, an example of that is PACE, where they have a Trapeze Pass software system, which is provided to a number of local operating regions. So while each region doesn't have the full picture of what is going on, they are basically carved out a slice in the software system to manage their own operations. Another example could be New Jersey Transit. New Jersey doesn't have individual transit agencies operating their paratransit service. They consolidated everything into one Uber New Jersey Transit paratransit system. That is another approach where each region has their own kind of carve out, and New Jersey Transit provides the IT, and then each region kind of operates on their own. If I'm correct, yeah. So yeah, 2R there are examples, not exactly like this context, but there are examples.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm really curious about how you presented some of this last year in your vision, which was really exciting, and I'm wondering in the process of implementing this awesome vision, where are you and where are the barriers that you're facing, and who who's responsible for fixing it, or what collaboration or help do you need to get to the endpoint in achieving your vision? And I'm really curious, Kevin, if you could, Matthew, you mentioned data standards as one of the barriers, and I know there's a lot of different data standards projects going on, and where do you see the need for them to get to in order to realize Matthew's vision?
Is that a question for me? Yeah.
You first.
Both.
Okay. Right now, Sound Transit people are in the room. I won't mention who they are. Right now, I think we're on a mission to just point out that this is something that needs to be handled. That's where we are at the moment. There are a lot of people.
There hasn't been a decision made to pursue anything other than that we need to pursue it.
I made a decision to show up today and talk to you about it. That's about as far as we've gotten in terms of progress. I think a lot of our efforts are just trying to build organizational awareness in Metro, PSRC, within Sound Transit, within our neighbors, community, Everett, Pierce, that the current status quo, what isn't quo, is in what is that? What is that online web cartoon? Never mind, that was a bad joke. Forget it. You guys are. So yeah, the deadline. This actually becomes a problem when Linwood Link Extension pushes us past the county boundary. The FTA, comes around every 3 years and says, Sound Transit, Metro, Pierce, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? And so that'll be, interesting to see what happens at that point.
Or it could be litigated even before that.
Right.
Yeah. And so. So every year and every extension where it brings it deeper and deeper across county boundaries creates an exponentially larger problem and exponentially larger risk to our transit agencies. So it is a problem that's here now, and so we're trying to catalyze and educate people that this is a problem that needs to be handled from the sole perspective of that's what's morally right. We cannot treat people with disabilities as second-class citizens. That stopped, So we, from a moral perspective, we have to do this. Full stop.
And I can go to the other half of that, which is kind of where could data standards fit into this, and what's the state of some of the data standards that would be needed for this. I have some firsthand experience with a nascent standard called the transactional data standard, which would really be for the booking portion of this, of being able to exchange trip request information between independent systems. And I can tell you firsthand that the state of that standard is very much nascent from a development standpoint and from sort of the rigor of is it ready for something at this scale? It's not. But I think one of the biggest barriers to that isn't really technical. Up to now, it's been institutional, and the absence of any kind of entity that could govern the development of that standard and bring stakeholders to the table, vendors, agencies, and various other groups that want to have a say in that, including all the way down out to CMS, and for like non-emergency medical transportation brokering, right? That entity hasn't existed. It didn't exist last year when we were here at this time, for those of you who were last year, but now it does, because mobility data has taken the decision to expand their scope. They were very focused on rider-facing transit data. That was really explicitly what they were taking on. Really earlier this year, they decided that they were going to start taking on other standards in transit that are not rider-facing. So the operational data spec, something called TIDES, which I can't remember what it stands for. And so they've really stepped into that vacuum, and I think that provides a real opportunity for something like TDS or something like it to also be adopted and have governance. So they have a lot of growing to do. That's not going to be painless for the industry for that process to happen, but the vacuum is gone, and I think that's a really big shift that is, which gives me a lot of hope.
Sorry. So yeah, there's ODS, TIDES, TDS, GOFS. What's our minimum viable exchange that's needed?
Are you signing up to help? So I don't know. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. First, I think is the first step is awareness. Building awareness that we cannot create a system that is unequal to those with disabilities in the Puget Sound region. We have an imperative in front of us. The technology, I think, will flow naturally from that once we choose a direction and we implement that direction. That's my diplomatic answer.
Well, I think this is an interesting scenario because you've got basically the physical infrastructure for ST3's being built out. It kind of provides a very very real physical deadline to deal with. And one thing you mentioned as an aside is that the transit and government in general tends to be pretty risk averse, and you accepted maybe DoD from that. And so my mind immediately went to was like, what would it look like to have an ARPA for transit? And I don't know if that's the proper metaphor or that's even a great way to be thinking, but we are in a time where the value of transit is just raising exponentially in terms of all the problems it can address from climate change standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a urban livability standpoint, to addressing the changing demographics of the country in terms of the aging of the population and more people becoming unable to drive. So with that value, I mean, the idea of an ARPA for transit, to me, it resonates. Going to sort of military metaphors has its own problems, but I think the idea of something that's like, hey, let's really take greater risks for greater benefits, to me, that was an exciting little aside that I heard you mention.
And I'd say not like all that stuff, and just our users are demanding so much more. Like the systems that we have set up were built, in the 80s and 90s, and technology has taken a quantum leap since then. But we have not adapted our systems to reflect those new standards of our customers. So, the thing is, you offer a great service, people will use it. And in some ways, our ridership is reflective that our product is old. In order to hit that next phase, in order to update our products, in order to meet what consumer demand is, we have to enable and we have to use the technologies of today, which we're not doing.
Great presentation. So I believe that riding transit is kind of like a universal language. Once you become experienced, like even if you travel the world, you pretty much know you get on a bus and you give the driver money and then the bus goes. Even paratransit users understand for the most part, no matter where you are, you have to schedule a ride ahead of time usually. And then, the bus comes or not. So with that said, I really agreed with Joe when he was questioning why we don't have like a mega agency. I guess just from a user standpoint, that seems like, riding transit in itself is pretty simple. So the idea of a mega agency sounds really appealing. So I just want to ask, what are in your opinion, the top 3 reasons not to create a mega agency, and then your top 3 reasons in support of regional agencies like we have now?
Wow. Top 3 reasons for in the paratransit context, or just in everything?
In general.
In general. Top 3, 4, I think is, like you said, simplicity from the user's perspective. Simplicity from an organizational perspective. There's just one organization to deal with. Third, you get better deal, less overhead because you can buy more buses at once and more infrastructure at once, and you just do the planning at once. So everybody knows what your deal is. That's, I think you see that like an MBTA, which is a state agency which runs the Boston area. There's just one agency to deal with, and you just go. On the downside, those big agencies, I think there's some great YouTubers who have pointed out how the structure that these mega agencies or the governance structure of some of these mega agencies actually cement inequities within their service structures. So in the case of Boston, they provide very expensive commuter service to very few people on the periphery while letting the bus service in the city go underinvested for years. That's partially the way that their council is constructed. They have they're suburban heavy, so they provide services that suburban users want, even though suburban users don't necessarily use the system. So the structure of a mega agency can have, and how it is set up, can have adverse consequences. And one of the ways to avoid that is, by having multiple smaller agencies that are closer to the constituents. So if you have a Pierce Transit that, wants to offer a more, leaner model and fewer services, like they can do that. And then you have King County Metro, which is a more robust agency, which goes above and beyond in many circumstances in offering a variety of services to our customers. And I'm not saying one is good or one is bad. They're just different ways of doing the same thing, and they can coexist in the same environment in what is this region. I don't think I had a third there. What was that good?
No, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
There's already an alliance of these agencies on a technical project. I'm curious if that provides any kind of a model for what could happen with paratransit. I'm referring to Orca.
Oh, yeah. Orca definitely does. So Orca is an example of how the regions, even though we have different operating models, different needs, we came together and decided to use a standard faring system for everybody. And it definitely does provide a model for how we can preserve operating flexibility, down below at the lowest levels, while agreement on a certain layer of transit service that will be contiguous across the Puget Sound region. So, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
There's your branding right there. Orca for paratransit. I don't know if that really works, actually.
I don't think it does. What?
I have a question over here, if you don't mind. So let's just assume that everyone gets on board with the 3R vision, and let's assume that there's a data standard or a data specification that is ready and workable. What is tactically like the next step? Is it contractually requiring each of the agency's current paratransit softwares to use that data spec? And what is the likelihood that they're willing to do it, given that they're not willing to develop APIs that connect with one another right now?
Yeah, I think the first level is actually, work on a data exchange type system. We've done some theoretical research here, Anat and I, into how do we track and how do we look at basically building an independent scheduling and routing algorithm that is not based upon commercial offerings. How do we just build that from the ground up? So we have some experience, dealing with paratransit data and how to interpret it and how to model it and make interesting decisions from that. So, I think the first step is continuing some of that research into developing open source solutions and open source standards into how we model paratransit systems and how we represent that to end users and deliver that data back. So I think that's the big lift for 3R is constructing some kind of data layer. After that, like implementing APIs is almost the easy part. You just have to, get these lower level systems to interpret that data and integrate it into their own models.